You've probably seen this happen before. A fantastic product, one you know for a fact is better than the competition, just fails. It gets absolutely crushed by a rival that's not even close in quality. It's a story that plays out all the time, and it leaves some of the smartest people in business just shaking their heads. So in this explainer, we're going to dig into why that happens and what it tells us about the real physics of the market. Let's jump in. So what's really going on? Is it just a string of bad luck, some unpredictable shift in the market? Or is there a fundamental rule of the game that most of us just miss? Well, the answer isn't really in the product itself. It's in the environment, the ecosystem where that product has to fight to survive.
We're all kind of raised on this simple, comforting idea. Build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door. But the market has a totally different physics. It's not the best product that wins. It's the most available product. And I don't just mean available on a store shelf, I mean available in the customer's mind.
And that brings us right to our first big idea, what we call the great product myth. This is the core belief that if your product is superior, success is going to naturally follow. But as we're about to see, the market just doesn't operate on that kind of logic. This idea, which thinkers like Seth Godin have really drilled into, completely flips the script on what we think customers are after. See, they aren't on some noble quest for the absolute, marginally better product. Nope. They're looking for the simplest, quickest, most obvious solution to their problem. Being served just means being the default choice that instantly comes to mind when they need something. This leads us to a really critical concept for this whole conversation: attention penetration. Now, this isn't just a fancy term for brand awareness. It's about existence, plain and simple. If a brand has zero attention penetration, for all intents and purposes, it's invisible. It literally doesn't matter how great the product is. The real war is won or lost right here, in the battle for attention, way before a customer even considers a purchase. Okay, so that's the theory. But what does this pattern actually look like out in the wild? In this next section, we're going to look at a few brands that absolutely mastered this game, whether they called it attention penetration or not. And our first example is a total classic: Dollar Shave Club. Think about it. They walked into a market completely dominated by giants like Gillette, who had spent decades and billions of dollars on R&D and advertising. There was no way they could win on product, so they didn't even try to play that game. They didn't compete on product. They competed on attention. That launch video wasn't an ad. It was a piece of viral entertainment. It was funny, it was relatable, and it completely sidestepped all the traditional channels. They knew the real victory wasn't about claiming a slightly better shave. It was about becoming the brand people talked about when they complained about overpriced razors. They achieved mental availability. You know who else does this, just on an epic scale? Apple. Their keynote events aren't product announcements. They're cultural holidays designed to absolutely dominate the global conversation for a week. The iPhone becomes this worldwide phenomenon months before you can even buy one. They make the product exist in our minds, long before it can ever exist in our hands. Now, today, this battle for attention isn't just being fought in the culture or on TV commercials. It's being fought on platforms that are run by machines. And this brings us to the new sheriffs in town, the modern gatekeepers of attention: algorithms. This is a massive shift in how marketing works. For 100 years, the goal was to persuade people, to win their hearts and minds. Now, your first job is to get noticed by an algorithm. Seriously, whether it's TikTok, YouTube, Amazon, if the machine doesn't pick your content to amplify, your audience will never even get the chance to see it. You just won't exist. And this isn't some dark art. It's actually a pretty straightforward feedback loop. As you can see here, it all starts with a small test group. The algorithm just watches. It measures signals like watch time, likes, shares. If it sees positive signals, it pushes the content out to a wider audience. That creates a flywheel. The more engagement you get, the more the algorithm shows your stuff. The whole game is just figuring out what signals that machine is looking for. So, what happens when you ignore these new gatekeepers? What's the real cost of failing to get noticed? Well, the consequences are pretty brutal, as we're about to see with our next example. BlackBerry. The rise and fall of this company is just a perfect case study in the cost of invisibility. If you look at this timeline, you'll see something fascinating. Right at their peak market share, in 2009, the cultural conversation had already moved on. The world was talking about the iPhone. BlackBerry didn't fail because their phones suddenly got terrible. They failed because they lost their spot on the culture. They became irrelevant. And once that happens, it's only a matter of time before the market share follows. And that's really the heart of it, isn't it? The market isn't out to get you. It just has a terrible memory. In a world this noisy, the single biggest risk isn't making a mistake, it's being silent. Quiet brands don't get punished, they just get erased. So, how do brands avoid being erased? Well, they have to adopt a totally different mindset, one that gives them a huge strategic advantage. We call this the mental availability edge. So this brings us back to that idea of mental availability, a framework that comes from researchers like Byron Sharp. And it's actually really simple. It's just the probability that a customer will think of your brand in a buying situation. The goal isn't to be the most loved or passionate brand. The goal is to be the one that's easiest to remember. It's about being easy to mind and easy to find. That's it. And this table really lays out the difference in thinking. You've got losing brands over here, totally obsessed with product features. Winning brands, they're obsessed with attention penetration. Losing brands are trying to be the best. Winning brands are just trying to be remembered. And maybe the biggest one of all, winning brands get that they have to appeal not just to their end customer, but to the gatekeepers, the algorithms, and the culture that decide who gets seen in the first place. Which brings us to our final section. Now that we've kind of decoded this signal, it's time to turn the camera around and ask a few tough questions about our own blind spots. First one, and it's simple. Where are you invisible? And I don't mean that as a metaphor. I mean literally. On which platforms, inside which communities, to which specific audiences, does your brand simply not exist at all? Second question, who really controls the attention in your market? Is it the YouTube algorithm? Is it a handful of key influencers? A particular magazine? You have to identify the real gatekeepers, and then ask yourself, honestly, if your strategy is actually designed to get past them. And finally, maybe the most powerful question of all. Just for a second, forget about conversion rates, forget about sales funnels. Just ask yourself this. What would happen if the right people simply noticed you? Answering that question is the first real step toward building a brand that's impossible to ignore.